So thank you all for coming out this evening to learn about the work of Elizabeth Turk. We've enjoyed having her several times as a speaker. We've been very thankful for that. So her sculpture, Suspended Meditation, now graces the west entrance of the Nucleus Science Center here on the Scripps campus, just behind me. So we'll get to hear about that. Born in Pasadena and raised in Orange County, Elizabeth attended Scripps College, where she studied with Aldo Casanova, a Claremont sculptor who many of you may have known. Since graduated in 1983, she has developed a distinguished career recognized internationally and bicoastally for her marble sculpture, public installations, and through ET projects, immersive art events, such as Look Up, that was initiated at Mount San Antonio Gardens. Some of you may have been involved with that, with those wonderful umbrellas. Currently, she splits time between a studio in Santa Ana and New York City. She's a MacArthur Fellow, an Annalee and Burnett Newman Foundation recipient, and a Smithsonian Artist Fellow, among other awards. So please welcome Elizabeth Turk.
Thank you, Catherine. As always, it's always fun to come back home, right? So I appreciate all of you being here tonight to learn more about this piece, because it is a really unique piece for me. So being able to talk about it and just share more of the background concepts and ideas just makes it really special. I thought you would like to see Hamilton Construction's film footage of the project, which is amazing because it had so many starts and stops during COVID, and as a result, everybody had new ideas and changes, as Suzanne well knows. So it was a pretty amazing project to be a part of. I really appreciated how many people jumped in, whether it was the engineers or the construction or landscape architects, let alone the board of trustees. Everybody had ideas for this science center by the end of umpteen million Zooms. So I appreciated the effort to be a part of it. At the time, I was working on a piece, a body of work called Tensions. And it really was about almost the Zen idea of intention and just being. Because I'm such a nature girl, as my mom knows, we grew up hiking and backpacking, and there's such an emphasis on nature. And the idea that I would spend so much time hitting a rock just seemed crazy. But I think that there's always a part of it that had felt kind of repulsive. There was very much a push-pull. Because there was so much control and so much kind of me. There was something about stone carving that I liked because it was a material that pushed back. You couldn't always have your idea be the only thing that you were in conversation with. And the over time, as many of you know, some of the earlier work is just crazy. I was more concerned with boundaries. Like if you carved something to the extreme, would it stop being about the material that it was? You know, could I carve marble to such an extreme that you no longer felt its gravitational pull and would no longer identify it as even a rock? So playing with that idea and moving into this space of not just why am I doing it, but where is beauty lost in that? Like there's something that extreme intention sort of loses its sense of awe because it's too singular in many ways. So this is another piece that was a part of that series. This one's called Home, or it was about nests. It was created with, as all my pieces, with leftover material. So the marble was quarried for the monuments in DC. It had been left behind because it had some imperfections. And then the redwood had been, the tree had been cut in the late 1800s. So they kind of were quarried or taken from the earth around the same time and then left. It was just an abandoned root in a farmer's pad that eventually got pulled out and was just resting there. So anyway, I liked the combination of those two. And again, it was a conversation about the beauty of just allowing a material to be, and then kind of this, whatever I was doing to the material itself. As always, I love carving the material so that it's translucent or incredibly light. But these pieces just rested, and there was something really lovely about them. These were the drawings that were a part of this conversation, and the spontaneity of the ink just kind of flowing to where it would be with this sort of detailed drawing was, again, that kind of back and forth. When you're working on a lot of these pieces, the stone pieces, they take so much time. They're so loud and they're so dirty that I loved coming home to something that was very delicate and very quick in the sense. You know, the stone pieces often take a long time, too long. These were the handheld pieces that were part of this exhibition. I loved making these. There was something about the carving that felt like the universe and the course of orbits, and yet they were embedded in their own sort of river stream, I guess. And there was part of the river stream that I kept thinking about, like taking that bit of marble that runs through fractures of what already exists and sort of freeing it. And there was some part of that conversation that just seemed to fit in the larger idea of the tension of human intention. All of these little stones have magnets. So these also become sort of things that you can play with, like moving the stones around and having them hold onto the base. So there was something about giving in this sort of course of action that I've taken over the years to letting go of my artwork. This was probably the start of that, where I was inviting the audience to come in and play with the sculpture itself so that you could sort of move the stones around. They were on steel bases, so they were like your own mini Zen garden in a sense. These ones were more characteristic of my earlier work, where the extreme carving was very obvious. But I just love this green quartzite. And I mean, there was just something so beautiful about the raw stones that hadn't been changed in any way by my hand, and that you could kind of compare and judge. These were many of the sketchbook pieces. Again, I would come home exhausted and just sit in my bed and start doing little drawings. A lot of them were about the flow. First it was sort of a magna type flow, or just moving through space and then hitting challenges, and not necessarily hitting obstacles, but sort of changing course. And you can start to see where these pieces become something that's similar to the piece Suspended Meditation. I was very interested in root structures and how they grow and what causes that shape. You can tell I also became very obsessive with those root structures, or you might say vines, or I think some of these are 28 or 45 feet long. I've always wanted to put these into mosaics, like mosaic stairs or something, but I love drawing on vellum. It was just so smooth and beautiful. It had such a wonderful kind of materiality to it. But I think that when you see the shape of these forms, you can understand the interior carvings of the stone that's suspended at the nucleus. When you look at those, I wanted the carvings to be not exactly a root structure, but definitely to reference it. I've often thought about, on my mom's side, there were a lot of mine engineers, and this idea of going into the earth and sort of tunneling out. It's when you go into quarries, marble quarries, especially in Vermont or Italy, it's unimaginable that these mountains are held together by these pillars that are just left. It's terrifying on one level, but there is something about getting into the interior of carving that was very intriguing. And I think that it comes out in the interior of that piece. And it is kind of reflective of how we as humans kind of get into things and dig out as far as we can go until we hit resistance of sorts. So I don't know. I've never thrown these drawings into the lecture about these pieces, but I thought that they were an interesting point of departure and one that is very clear when you actually see the sculptures of that time. Now, the stone, I don't usually carve in limestone, but like all of my work or all of my material, it's all discarded pieces. And in Carlsbad, there's a stone yard. And she just had some beautiful stones. I mean, that green quartzite was there, and these crazy limestone pieces that somebody had purchased for their garden were left abandoned there, and they just looked lonely and really interesting. And apparently they had been, as I was saying to you before, they had been carved by a river in Texas. And I mean, it's kind of a waterfall area. I've never been there. At some point I'll have to do that. But you can see in the exterior of the stone the massive force that created that exterior. It's a carving that I wanted to honor in a certain way. And I thought it was, it mirrored the tradition that I think of the Pacific Rim, as we're all here now looking at this kind of merging of so many different cultures. But the scholar stone, the tradition of the scholar stone, has always been intriguing ever since I was playing down at China Cove down in Corona del Mar, where there were some homes that had rock gardens. And it was just a very interesting idea to meditate on a stone, on a naturally changed stone. And so when I was down in Carlsbad, the rock that you see out in front of the nucleus, it had this magic to me. When you looked at the exterior of it, it was in some ways like a dinosaur, in some ways kind of human. You could read whether, you couldn't quite put it in the landscape or animal category as a more traditional scholar stone, but I love that it was a mystery. It stayed a mystery, and it was very alluring, and then stayed in my studio for years before I could touch it. But here you can see some of the tools, the grinders, I guess it's all blurred out, the forklifts and stuff of the studio. We suspended the piece. I live on top of Back Bay, so on the very edge of a cliff, and I suspended the sculpture there. For the first show or first exhibition that where we had it, we did a simulcast. And it was kind of cool because people would walk by and you would just see their heads as they wave. But it took up the wall of the gallery. And then behind you, you can see the back bay is tidal. So there are moments that it was just suspended over the water. And I fell in love with this idea that it just felt as if it was suspended from the skies, and that it lacked that gravity that it was supposed to have to help define it as a heavy rock. It was kind of scary because there were, of course, the storms, and these are glass windows. So we had it there a few months anyway. This gets to the other layer, another layer. I mean, stone carving takes forever, so there are so many layers and avenues that one's mind starts to penetrate. I was thinking about shapes of disruption. This was probably 2010, 2009. And I've always been obsessed with the early Edgerton photographs of the atomic explosion because I had never thought to look at the sky as a shape or a potential shape, or that humans could even destroy and change that shape in a way that would have edges and boundaries that we could capture. And there's something about just that concept that seems so reflective of an ultimate disruption. If you could put a shape to the concept of disruption, it seemed a very powerful one. And so I think that not in the forefront, because you kind of put all of these ideas into the soup or cocktail of ideas, and that stone that had been resting in my studio or suspended off the gantry just started to have a form for me and a purpose. I think the series of photographs and obviously there's the draw of what's possible at MIT just continued to be at the forefront. I mean, you look at some of these shapes and there's so much like that stone itself, like penetrating the interior. So I teamed up with a friend of mine who is a professor at MIT, John Oschendorf, and luckily he was not doing that much, or he was available for Zooms during COVID. And I really wanted to push the possibilities of suspension. You know, how do you make something feel light if you're going to have to see like heavy steel pieces surrounding it? So this is his work, what he does in his studios in kind of pushing the elements, pushing material to its most delicate. We were in a joint lecture at a MacArthur meeting, and we were back to back. And so, of course, we started getting into the material. And this was the piece that, or both of them, but that we were talking about. But this piece, my piece on the left, he just couldn't believe that that was a single piece of stone, and that it was impossible that it would maintain its form over time, and that it could be pushed to that extreme without those arcs breaking. So anyway, I said, yeah, it's an intuition. Like, you couldn't ever design the piece because you would come into weaknesses, fractures within the stone just in its own making. And so you design it as a matrix, but then you have to have this conversation where there's movement within an inch of where you decide to put the connections for that matrix. So that was a little bit of how we framed our approach to suspended meditation. This is another mentor of mine, James Freed. He he was always one to talk to me about disruption. Like, he would always say that you are making a good piece if like half the people in the room don't like it and get up and leave, or that is just about to break. And I keep thinking about those words because they're really true. Like, so much of my work is pushed just to the point where it's not going to work any longer. I try to step back. Sometimes I've pushed it too far, but for the most part, there's been this intuitive dialogue about just when to stop. So when he did this Air Force piece, I don't know, there was something in it that I love the tripod always, and there was something in the honor of it. But I think, obviously, when you see this piece, you can see the connection. This was some of the renderings at Amber Lake. Amazing. She was an amazing partner in this project. In moving through the course of ideas, she had amazing energy just to keep executing all the different concerns and taking into consideration so many ideas from so many different directions. So these were the sketches that John and I put together. You can tell it was COVID because the original ideas were on his couch with a walnut and string. I loved looking at this piece. My original sketches in the corner were all aerial. There was something about just seeing this piece from the sky that seemed really significant. And I don't really know why. I'd never ventured from a horizon line, which is how you enter the piece, how you walk into the plaza. But anyway, some of the different ideas I thought I would share with you because they went into so many different possibilities. But I kept wanting to bring the scaffolding, or what we call the masts, down to their least profile. And I was really hoping that the trees would act to disappear the mass as they grew, and the foliage kind of came out and surrounded those pieces. So again, that you could feel that tension of this rock just being suspended from the skies. The actual suspension was really difficult. I think, as Suzanne remembers, Scripps wanted it to be engineered for 2 extra football players from CMC to ride atop. So the mass had to be fortified to much more than I would have really considered. The pool itself, John engineered so that if there was to be an earthquake, I think 8 to 10 or 11, the line, the cable, would move the stone in the circular direction to the maximum of the pond. So the pond itself acts as a barrier for that purpose. You can see the various, I tried to put everything into one page there, but the various people that played an enormous role in trying to get this off the ground was really something. There was also one of his students put together the pin that goes into the interior of the piece, Maya Dawes. She's done a lot of the Apple buildings with those connections because not only did she design this pin that is centered into the piece and has such a tight tolerance, but the ball bearing, the 360-degree ball bearing, so that the piece would move on the slightest breeze. I mean, I wanted it to be a whisper that would move the piece so that so I wasn't waiting around for your 100-mile-an-hour wind to see any change in it. The bearing it's interesting. The bearing is really tight. They wanted it extra tight again because of the being able to hold more weight than the actual stone. But she did a beautiful job, I think, because it does. It moves. Just even today when I was over there, it was moving on a very slight breeze. This was the installation itself. The tolerance at the top, it had the bearing had to be centered not only on the concrete line that goes from CMC, but it also had to be on the doorway that you could see through the entire length of the building. Then from the aerial view, from the balcony above, the stone had to be centered, or the bearing had to be centered on the pond itself. And then from the perspective of that we'll walk down the stairs, that too, I forgot the main thing, the mast. The third mast holds the line of the cable if you're standing from CMC. So the moment of whatever resistance was when these guys were at the top and we put it on, and it was within 1/8 of an inch that we had to, manipulate the bearing to get that centered. And I was so impressed with everybody's ability to make it that precise. Anyway, so it was from that balcony that I wanted to have that perfect view. We took some film of just the moment, the moment that we turned on the water, the moment that we actually suspended the piece, and it hung there, which was, which was scary. Very scary. But anyway, I thought you guys might enjoy seeing that. You can jump in with any questions along the way. This is such a nice, intimate group. So,
could you talk about the lighting?
The lighting was one of the most difficult parts of the project because we wanted it to be really brilliant at night. The lights had to rest on the surface of the water. If the lights were under the water, it would just illuminate the pond. And so the lighting was really designed by Hamilton Construction, Sean. We had to make elements that fit onto the lights themselves so that they would make the interior glow. The interior is 14 leaf gold. And it's gold for a multitude of reasons. I mean, gold is such a paradox, right? Our temples, our churches, but it's also just a mineral. And in my family, it's a mineral that brought us out to California, a lot of us. And there was something very, I don't know if spiritual is the right word, but I wanted to put the spiritual back into the earth in a way, and have this kind of symbol of disruption emanate something that was of its most natural state, even though manipulated. It was also really important, and I think I was saying this to Judy, that it reflects some of the Scripps background. I am forever in love with Plato's cave, and I think about it more now than ever before, and the idea of being confused by reality or a shadow or a reflection was really significant. That at night this piece would transform into something more beautiful, and where the reflection was as clear as the reality of the piece. That was really important, and gold made that glow, made that happen. So this speaks a little bit to the tradition of the scholar stone and the idea of this kind of battered but beautiful exterior. That's kind of how I'm feeling, we're all feeling in a way. Like it's just, especially after all these years of rock carving, You know, there's something that is beautiful about that worn surface that I didn't want to change. I wanted to show the scars of what that rock had gone through, and yet I wanted the carving to be there. Again, my favorite is at night because of the way that we were able to light the piece, and because it was a really dark plaza. I mean, that was the other thing. I love the idea that we were able to redesign the plaza in such a way that it became a gateway to Scripps, and that the wall was kept over on the one side, but that it integrates the campuses. That was a big part of the excitement of this project. This is probably my favorite view. Down below, you can see the space. It was important to me that it be just resting just above the surface, enough to have a nice reflection, enough for you to know that it's suspended and feel its suspension, but not enough that it became dangerous. You know, not so high that it was something else. It was still something that's approachable, that you want to push, that has that come here, but then you want to stay away. There's something, going back to that first show, there's something in that tension that I wanted to dance around with. And at night, I think that it does that in the way, I mean, I've watched students come up, and at night you can't tell how deep the pond is. And that was wonderful to me. I wanted it to feel like a black hole, and to feel kind of this unexpected part, like that's part of the disruption. It's kind of uncomfortably close to the door in a way. Like there's a, wait, this was important for me as a science building. I thought, you know, there are so many times where the just exuberation of a great idea takes us down a path so fast and so excitedly that we don't even think about the possibilities of the ramifications of that path. And to me, that's probably one of the biggest questions for science. Where will our legacy of curiosity be in the end? It's something really kind of intriguing. And I like the idea that there was a little bit, just on the edge of discomfort, this black hole with a suspended meteor. It kind of crossed those lines, especially if it was moving. Then, after creating that piece and having this big conversation with the materiality of a project, I sculpted it in 3D for a hologram. So we came out here and scanned the exterior, and then created a skin for it to kind of mirror the reality. But I wanted a conversation that went the other way around, from reality to cyber world. So this can be anywhere, can be on your wall, can be in this room, can be in any kind of rendition of Scripps, I guess. But I liked that this reality of a weighted object could suddenly have, no gravitational pull at all, and be kind of this strange amorphous thing. So anyway, so it's sort of a rear entry into the sculpture itself, because I wasn't sure where the carving would lead me originally, and it was so important to have a conversation with the real world. So anyway, so that's about it. I'm sure there are many more tangents that were in my mind in creating the piece, but these are the broad strokes and kind of from whence the piece was developed. So jump in if you have questions, and if not, we'll meander down as it gets dark to the piece itself, because I think you all had set up a lovely a lovely table of munchies. So, yeah, I'm happy to have conversations. Thank you.
Elizabeth will be over there, and I'm sure once you see the piece, you'll have questions. But does anyone have any questions before we wander?
Well, how long once you finally decided to work on this piece, because you had it for a long time, how long did it take you to make?
Oh, probably about a year and a half. Well, it starts and stops. Like carving out the interior and then just letting it exist, like in that state. It was on the gantry in my studio for a long time. And then I was kind of worried about the mounting of it because I didn't mount it for a long time. And it wasn't carved suspended, it was carved on a steel dolly. So that element of it, I don't know, it caused me anxiety. So I waited another year to just do that. And then probably the gold wasn't until I was going to exhibit it. So this one, it's been exhibited as that projection in New York, and then it was part of a Mayer Sculpture Garden exhibition for a couple years in Michigan before it came to Scripps. So, yeah.
Has it ever gotten too windy or?
It hasn't. Like I tested it for over a year on my back porch, which led to, I travel a fair amount, so it was just left there. But I could look at it through the camera to see if it had, hit the window or not, and it survived really well. I was just, no matter what engineering had told me, and that was before I got into real nitty-gritty, I just wanted to see for myself. That I wanted to see that there was no bouncing in the line, because originally I had a line half the width. So, which of course I really wanted to here, but nobody would let me do it, right, Suzanne? I was crying and they wouldn't let me do it, so go ahead.
How much does it weigh?
That's always the question. It weighs about 750 pounds. So it has a lot of interior carved out. So it's anyway.
Did you carve it in this orientation, or was it laying down in a different position and you carved it and then you just?
Both. I always loved the top. There was an obvious top to me and an obvious kind of cone over where water had hit it. And you could tell almost where it had been buried. It was just more delicate on the surface part, and it seemed to have more animal, or it was more alive in a certain area, and it was also more delicate. There are a few holes along the top that the water had penetrated and created this long valley, and I wanted to maintain that. So that was the easy part to put into a steel kind of system that I made. So, yeah.
I'm impressed that you have the after weight. What was the before weight when you started?
The before weight, we weighed it in a truck down in Carlsbad, and I think it was probably about 1,500, 1,600. And to your question, 750 is the weight that I say, and that's on the heavy end. It's probably a little bit more like 600. I did go back in and carve out some of the interior that took off some point, but 750 seemed like a safe weight to work with I padded it. Hamilton Construction was the one who was adamant about taking it to figure out exactly. So,
Thinking about your 2 football flares,
I can't say that very loudly because it hasn't happened.
has there been, or have you heard of how people are reacting to it? Do they want to touch it and
At the beginning, became a good luck charm. I love that. They wanted to lean and touch it and just swing it a little bit, and it was for good luck. And I thought that was a fabulous tradition, but it made Celeste, or she was the person on the phone, too nervous, and so they put up all this signage. But the people would come, I've been there at night watching, and people would come and start trying to put their arm to find out how deep it was. And we made it intentionally that deep so that you couldn't easily get onto the stone. You know, so it's deeper than it really sort of needs to be, so that it also acts as something of a barrier. But I love the idea that people were touching it to sort of watch it move. But I can see where that would develop into, like, really see how far. So, yeah. But nobody's ever done anything derogatory to it, which is very respectful and nice. So, yeah, as a symbol of disruption, you would think that might be the first possibility. So, well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Such a nice night.